The world's third major manufacturing bloc is under the North American Free Trade Agreement, an economic alliance of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. The NAFTA system is utterly unlike its competitors. There is far and away a dominant player, the United States, of course, but that player is also the most technologically advanced. Canada exists at a similar wage and tech level, so what integration exists is largely concentrated where Detroit, Michigan meets Windsor, Ontario, the core of the northern lobe of North American automotive manufacturing. The single bridge connecting the two cities carries more cargo traffic by value than America's total trade with all but its top 3 trading partners. There are 2 bits of magic in the manufacturing of North America. The first is within the United States itself. America is a big place. In terms of flattish, usable land, it is easily twice the size of either Europe or China, both of which have vast swaths of nigh useless territories that are mountainous or desert or tundra. Both have built up about as large a population as they can manage, while the Americans could easily double their population and still have loads of spare land, which is precisely what's likely to happen by the end of the 21st century. America may not have the wage variation that exists throughout Asia and to a lesser degree in Europe, but it more than makes up for it with geographic variation. Different parts of the United States have wildly different costs for food, electricity, petroleum products, and land. Each region has its own unique characteristics. Cascadia is known for its left-wing politics, hefty regulation, unionized environment, but most importantly, sky-high urban land costs. Seattle sits on an isthmus, while Portland is squashed between highlands. Both boast traffic as epic as their property prices. The only saving grace from a cost point of view is the region's cheap electricity. Hooray, hydropower. The only play the Pacific Northwest has in the world of manufacturing is to move upmarket and provide the highest value add possible. This is the land of Boeing and Microsoft. The American Northeast is tight. High land costs, high labor costs, overloaded infrastructure, high regulatory barriers, heavily unionized, densely populated cities, nearly zero green space to be had. Most manufacturing has long since decamped the region, leaving behind a weird bifurcation. First are the legacy corporations that date back nearly to the country's industrialization, such as GE, Raytheon, and Thermo Fisher Scientific. None produce all that much locally, but corporate headquarters and intensive design work both call Massachusetts home. Second, what stuff is still built here has been shaped by ever-rising costs for siting, labor, and regulatory compliance. It is a merger of industry and brain work. Biomedical, system controls, scientific instruments, aeronautical and navigational devices, electrical systems, and the design, final assembly, and refurbishment of a variety of aerospace, maritime, and naval hardware. Above all, the Northeast is where the training takes place for the brain work that drives all American manufacturing everywhere. After all, the Northeast is home to Yale, Harvard, and that most hallowed hall of nerds, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The Front Range, where I hang my hat these days, and the Arizona Sun Corridor are a world apart. Land is dirt cheap. Regulations are for the bonfire. But there just aren't all that many people, and the cities are certainly not close together. The combined population of the two zones' urban corridors isn't much more than 10 million, and the drive from Colorado Springs, the southern extreme of the very extended Denver metro, to Albuquerque is a cool 4 hours. And even that only if the traffic is light, the weather is good, and the cops are asleep. Between very limited economies of scale and high in-region transport costs, standard manufacturing supply chains are almost out of the question. The solution? Tech servicing and all-in-one manufacturing hubs that don't heavily integrate with the rest of the country unless it makes sense for the product to be flown. This is the corner of America getting into high-end semiconductor fabrication of the Japanese and Taiwanese style. The Gulf Coast is Energy Alley. Petroleum and natural gas are both produced and processed there. The shale revolution has so deluged the region in vast volumes of low-cost, high-quality hydrocarbons that the region is busy expanding its industrial plant to make not just intermediate products like propylene and methanol, but increasingly down-market products like safety glass, diapers, tires, nylon, plastics, and fertilizer. The biggest problem? Siting can be a bit of a bitch. Big refineries need maritime access and lots of space. Still, this region lucks out in two ways. First, the Texas coast sports an extensive chain of barrier islands that provide it with more shielded port potential than all of Asia. And the lower Mississippi in southern Louisiana isn't even remotely shabby either. Second, most American petrochemical facilities were built with lots of standoff distance. Working with large volumes of oil and natural gas at high temperatures can be dangerous work. At least some of that empty space can be converted and is being converted into yet more industrial capacity. A region that consistently surprises to the upside is the American Piedmont. Sub-average educational system, semi-rugged terrain that both increases transport and land costs while limiting opportunities for integration and economies of scale. Limited options for river transport. Doesn't feel like the South should be very successful, but the locals more than make up for the shortcomings with oppressively felonious levels of charm. Rather than wait for investors to come to them, Southerners venture out to potential investors the world over, typically bringing with them their delegation's combined body weight in bourbon to smooth over any cultural barriers. Fun fact, when hard-drinking American Southerners meet with equally hard-drinking Koreans, the result is one of those irresistible force, immovable object contests. Once the Southerners inebriate, land an investor, they then set to work back home to create the perfect customized business environment. Infrastructure is expanded, the workforce is exquisitely tailored not just for the investor's business, but for specific jobs. Tax laws are changed, and the Southerners do what they do best, make outsiders feel like they're part of the family. Embarrassingly little American investment drives the South, but foreign investment? Everywhere. The American South has become a playground for Germany's VW and Mercedes-Benz, Japan's Honda, Mazda, Nissan, and Toyota, Korea's Hyundai and Kia, and Sweden's Volvo. Even persnickety Airbus has facilities in Charleston, South Carolina, and Mobile, Alabama. Florida. You go to Florida for the beaches, Disney World, and retirement, not to manufacture stuff. And we're walking. The Great Lakes region was once known as America's Steel Belt. A bit of canal work in the mid-1800s connected the Northeast to the Great Lakes and Greater Mississippi, making this region the greatest integrated manufacturing zone on the planet. For a time. During the Great Depression, the Americans adopted something known as the Jones Act, which forced any cargo shipped between any two American ports to use only vessels that were American-built, owned, captained, and crewed. That, put conservatively, increased the cost of water transport in the United States by a factor of 5. What made this region special and successful withered. Add in international competition during the globalization age, and the region has since been reimagined as the Rust Belt, despite arguably having the nation's best educational system. Manufacturing still exists, of course. Illinois is home to none other than John Deere, with the bulk of the continent's large farm equipment even today manufactured in the Midwest. Detroit is no slouch, but neither is it the region's norm. Instead of mass volume, heavily integrated systems, most players are on the small side, heavy into highly technical custom work, and often supplying specialty parts to Texas. The Texas Triangle comprises the cities of Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio. From a manufacturing point of view, the Triangle has it all. Cheap food, cheap power, cheap land, no income tax, minimal corporate tax, hilariously light regulations. And that won't change. Hell, the Texas legislature only meets once every other year for only 35 days, and legislators are constitutionally barred from even considering legislation for the first half of that time window. American manufacturers of all types have flocked to the region. The single biggest subsector is automotive, but that oversimplifies a dizzying variety and dynamism. Austin operationalizes Silicon Valley's ideas. Dallas-Fort Worth leverages its banking center to turn Austin's brain work into mass manufacturing. San Antonio mixes lower cost than even the Texas average with the tech of Austin to blow out anything that can be put on an assembly line. But the real star of the Texas game is Houston. It plays with Austin in tech, and Dallas-Fort Worth in automation, and San Antonio with mass manufacture, and it is a financial capital, and it is America's energy hub, and it is in the Gulf Coast region, and it is America's biggest port by value, and it is really good at moving around big chunks of metal. The machine work the Germans are so good in, Houston comes in a solid second place globally. No wonder Houston is the country's second largest concentration for Fortune 500 headquarters. Most of America's regions would do very well flying solo, but they do not need to. Add in the country's broad-scale road and rail system for transporting intermediate products, and in many ways the American manufacturing system has more variety than even Asia, even without its northern and southern neighbors. This brings us to the second bit of magic in NAFTA manufacturing. America does have a neighbor that complements its system, Mexico. The wage differential between the American and the Mexican average is approximately 6-1, less than Asia's split, but bigger than Europe's. That doesn't tell the entire story, however. Mexico is a different beast compared to many of the other countries we've covered. Anti-Americanism didn't stop dictating Mexican industrial policy until the 1990s. And Mexico didn't really start playing the industrialization game until 2000, which, incidentally, is a mere heartbeat before China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. Being a late starter definitely generated some problems, but nothing has held Mexico back more than its topography. Mexico's low latitude puts it firmly in the tropics. The combination of tropical heat and tropical moisture and tropical bugs makes the tropics the most problematic climate possible for industrialization. Building materials are compromised. Concrete often sets incorrectly due to the humidity. Asphalt slides in the heat. And the population must do battle with tropical diseases. Mexicans address these issues by moving up onto the broad plateau between the Sierra Madre mountain chains, but that has generated new problems. Living at altitude means no coastal access and no navigable rivers, necessitating artificial infrastructure that must battle with the terrain at every step. Trains can only carry half their nameplate capacity when on rails that aren't as little as a 0.25% slope. And there's a lot more than a 0.25% slope on most mountains. Everything gets very expensive very quickly. Another problem of moving up a mountain is that the higher one climbs, the lower the humidity and the vapor pressure of water. For those of you who live at sea level, that means water not only evaporates quickly, it actually boils at a lower temperature, specifically about 15 degrees lower in Mexico City than in Miami. These characteristics take us two places. First, Mexico does have an extreme labor cost variation of the sort that makes East Asia work so well. The country's fractured nature ensures it. But that variation is not easily accessible, making the point more or less moot until such time as Mexico's infrastructure can catch up. Second, as one moves north from Mexico City, the combination of higher latitudes plus different wind and sea currents and a shifting mountain complexion turns the land to desert. Normally, this would be bad. Rainfall is so low that very little non-irrigated agriculture occurs in northern Mexico at all. That means cities are on their own. There are no hinterlands to draw tomorrow's population from. But that, in turn, creates an interesting political and economic dynamic. When cities are, in essence, oases, the normal evolution is for a single person or small group of people to assert control over just about everything. If infrastructure or industrial plant needs to be built, someone has to pay for it, and whoever does the paying likes to keep control over it. If the city isn't surrounded by a belt of forest or farms, there really isn't anywhere for rebels to hide. That makes the Mexican system, particularly the northern Mexican cities, fairly oligarchic. Normally, oligarchic systems are neither wealthy nor dynamic because the bosses keep the cash to themselves. In the case of northern Mexico, however, these jefes are hard up on the US border and serve as gateways to the world's largest industrial and consumer market. That changes the math. Northern Mexican business people still integrate with one another, at least within their own shared metro region, but it is far more important for them to plug into an American supply chain, particularly the wealthy Texas Triangle supply system. Perhaps best of all, while the United States features the developed world's healthiest demographic structure, Mexico features the best of the advanced developing worlds. There's plenty of consumption on both sides of the border. End result? The Texas-Mexico axis boasts the technological sophistication of Japan, the wage variation of China, and the integration of Germany with its neighbors, all within the footprint of the world's largest consumption market. That is where we are now. But now is not the future.